In southwest China's mountainous Wuling area, Tang Youlian, a 40-year-old villager, is checking crops on her farm with her granddaughter. Mrs. Tang has resided on this mountain with her husband and children for decades. A year ago, her family still lived in a shabby house with a muddy courtyard. But now, everything has changed.
There
used to be a pigsty here, and our old house was over there. The house was built out of wood and had 5 rooms, which were quite damp, especially after a rain. Our cabinets and storage boxes often fell apart. It was very dangerous when the flash floods came, as the house could easily collapse.
Tang's old house was built halfway up the hill. A 1-meter wide road was the only way to connect with civilization.
It took half an hour at least to walk back home from the country road. No cars could come here.
Mrs. Tang said her family longed to have a new house, at least with better living conditions. But a lack of money was a stumbling block. They could not afford an expensive and long-lasting housing loan with only their meager income to rely on. However, a securitized land exchange system has been in operation on a trial basis in Chongqing. By cutting the amount of land used for building homes and converting it into new farmland, villagers can get credits known as dipiao or land tickets. These credits can then be auctioned on the city's rural property exchange. Developers need to first buy land credits for the equivalent amount of farmland. The system gives farmers the opportunity to monetize the right to develop rural land. In 2012, Tang's family was told by the village government that the reclamation of their home could bring them compensation of 180 yuan or $29.5 per square meter of land. After talking it over, the family decided to demolish their house for the reclamation. They got about 90,500 yuan, enough to pay for construction on the new house. Transaction records indicate that the Tang family's previous home was worth just several thousand yuan. They managed to secure a 10-fold value increase by having their property reclaimed. They used the money to build a 3-story home not far from their original house.
Our family has lived there for more than 80 years, but building a new house in the original location would not allow us to obtain so much money. By agreeing to move, we can get more money from the government.
Tang's new house is located at the foot of the mountain, about a 30-minute walk from her old field. It's one of the 40 houses that have recently been built in this concentrated residential area. Other villagers have also moved into this area, while others are waiting for their homes to be built. Tang believes it would have been impossible to move into a new house without the help of the reclamation program.
Our new house is good, very convenient. It used to take more than 1 hour to walk to town, but now we can take buses.
This diagram explains the whole process. In the past, Tang both lived and farmed on the hill. Now her old house has been demolished, and the right to develop an area of space equal in size to her old property has been auctioned to developers. Tang has not only earned profits from the auction, but is also now able to grow crops both on her old farmland and the area where her old house stood. This allows her to grow more crops overall. Rural people living outside of China's few land reform pilot zones are not so lucky. According to Chinese law, urban land is owned by the state and rural land is under collective ownership. Rural people can utilize this land but have no right to sell or develop it.
One of the biggest problems, I think, for farmers at the moment is that they have this land which they can farm, but they don't actually own it. So all land, all rural land in China is owned collectively by the village collective, and it can be sold on, but only collectively. So individual farmers cannot make that decision for themselves. So that means they're sitting on a sort of potential asset, but they cannot realise the value of their asset, and that's not fair. If you're an urbanite, you don't own the land under your home, but you do own your home at least for 70 years. So in all, for all intents and purposes, you do own your home. But if you're a farmer, you don't, and that means that when you leave the farm, if you want to move to the city, you can rent out your land for sort of annual rent, but normally that's not very much money. But you cannot sell it. So when you arrive in the city, you arrive penniless, which means that you have no chance really of living a proper urban life. So it means that any migrant worker starts off on the back foot, and that's deeply unfair and very socially damaging.
But reforms are underway. Chinese leaders put forward a multitude of reforms at a key party meeting in November. A reform master plan approved at the session promises to give the country's 650 million rural residents more property rights. A rural property market will be established, and people will be encouraged to transform their collective rights into a shareholding system. A pilot program will also enable the mortgaging and transfer of homesteads.
I think at the moment you have many more transfers of land on a temporary basis. This isn't really selling land, but it's certainly better than not being able to transfer your land. And there are experiments going on in places like Chongqing, where people are effectively selling their land, and they're mortgaging their land, which again is very, very important, because at the moment farmers really struggle to find capital so that they can invest in sort of in machinery. And if China's going to modernise its agriculture, it needs to industrialise agriculture.
The land reclamation policy allows villagers to retain the land they used to grow crops. Mrs. Tang said her family's income has increased from growing more crops on their land. The move has given her family better living conditions and a more convenient life. Mrs. Tang can still grow crops in the old field. She says they can gain more than 100 kilograms of rape seeds and 500 kilograms of corn per year. It increases their family incomes as well.
瓜的花啊，瓜开的花。
这是南瓜花了。
南瓜花啊。
哦，这花了，它也开的。这个就是红花，这个看它就结果。
那个花结果。
哦，这个结了。
那个都没有果。
靠来。
哦。
应该靠来。
叶子或许都是草孩哈。
你了跟它一直死了切的了。
可以喂猪那些哈，那些叶子哈。
这个叶子猪不吃。
猪不吃哈。
Mrs. Tang still spends a lot of time on her farm, fertilizing crops, pulling weeds, and spraying pesticide. Her children have grown up and now work in town. But these days, her main concern is taking care of her new granddaughter.
Now that we have our new house, we can live better. All I need to do is take care of my little granddaughter.